I'm Dr. Bart Rademaker, and this is Prescription for Your Transformation. Real people, real conversations, and real success. Also part of the Doctor's Guide, helping you guide you yourself through this complex journey of health optimization. Why? Because, first of all, we need to understand what's wrong. If there is something wrong with our health, how do we actually optimize it? And what are the tools and resources out there? Because there's a myriad of tools and resources out there. And how do you determine which ones are the best ones? And that's part of my job, to actually curate, educate, and then guide both consumers and my colleagues out there as to how to determine what's the best path. Because what may work for one person may not work for another person, because everything is very much context dependent most of the time. Sometimes, like you'll find out today, there's a product out there that's actually going to serve everyone, regardless of what context they're actually in. And what I mean by context, what the health status is, because there's a product out there that would absolutely transform your life. Because when you hear the technology and when you hear the basis of this technology, it will make perfect sense why this is one of those products that you want to have. So it gives me great pleasure to be introducing the founder and the CEO of BioCharger, and I'm going to have them both introduce themselves, a little bit about their background, and then we're going to do a deep dive as to why this technology, why bioenergy technology is so important for us today to help us optimize our health, not just relying on supplements or drugs or surgery, but relying on energy. So Jim, not sure which Jim, let's start off with the founder, Jim, introducing you, and then we'll go with the CEO, that Jim, that I know very well. Introduce yourselves, and we'll just do a deep dive, and we'll have the conversation go where it goes.
First off, Bart, thanks for having us. I'm Jim Law. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Advanced Biotechnologies, home of the BioCharger. My background is I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur. I worked for Steve Jobs and Apple back in the 80s, but since then and over the last 30 years, have had three businesses. Both the first two businesses were quite successful, and I was very excited about that, but not nearly as excited about what we're doing with the BioCharger, and the difference being understanding the difference between success and fulfillment. This is very fulfilling. You'll understand why as we have the conversation. I'm a father of four. I have my first grandbaby as of 9 months ago yesterday, and I have three granddogs.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And my name is Jim Girard, and I'm the original inventor of the BioCharger. I've been researching energy technology for the last 35 years. Have been evolving it ever since. It's been a big passion of mine, just trying to understand the mechanisms of how these devices all work and how we can integrate it into our lives.
So when I first met you guys a couple of years ago, and I think it was a conversation with actually both of you, you really enlightened me in how it is that we've evolved as humans over millions of years. And for me, that was a great eye-opener and has led me down this path for a lot more research into all these energy systems. And so just as a pre-frame for the listeners, understand our bodies, which is 70 trillion cells. It's a complex network of communication systems based on energy. And so every cell is actually communicating with all the other cells in a myriad of different ways. And it's not just a chemical one, but also energetic one. And when you think about it, as we've evolved, over millions of years in harmony with nature, well, it makes sense then that our bodies are dependent on all these different energies. And it was a beautiful explanation that I got from you guys. And so I'm going to let this conversation go organically as to what you believe that the listeners need to hear now today. Maybe starting off with specific problems or specific challenges, or put the whole energy system into context so people can relate to that and understand the huge value that your system offers.
Sure. I'll start at a high level, and as you quickly learn, Jim is the brains behind this outfit here, and so he'll be able to do a deeper dive on the different areas. But The problem that we're trying to solve is really our modern day lifestyles have gotten the best of us. And if you look statistically, just in the last 5 years, and this is a report by the CDC, that American adults, 4 in 10 American adults 5 years ago had at least one form of chronic disease. And that was pretty startling then, but it's even more startling now because fast forward 5 years, it is now 6 in 10, 60% of American adults have at least one form of chronic disease. That's over 200 million people. And now 4 in 10 have 2 or more. So even though we're more aware, and some of the mega trends that are happening in the wellness industry, which we've been studying, doing a lot of research on, even with more investment, more awareness, people kind of taking control of their own health, the COVID experience and all of that, we're still getting sicker. And what's when we look for root cause, we look at another statistic that's pretty startling, and that's that on average, and this isn't just the US, civilized countries, we spend an average of 93% of our time indoors. Now, when we're indoors, we're blocked from nature, but most importantly, we're blocked from 4 essential energies that exist in nature that are truly vital to our health and wellness. I mean, medically and scientifically proven to be vital to our health. And the consequence of being indoors, aside from being blocked from these key energy sources, is that we're surrounded by man-made energies that I think, at least for this conversation, most of your audience would agree are probably not the ideal energies that Mother Nature intended for us to have and to function from. So, in a nutshell, the further away we get from nature, the sicker we become. And why it's so important to have these energies is because the only way our body can heal, and you're more aware of this than anyone, is through regeneration. We're making 3, I think you talked about 70 trillion cells in our body. We're making 3 to 4 million cells per second while we're having this conversation. It's the only way our body can heal, recover, rejuvenate, revitalize. Unfortunately, if you don't have adequate energy at the cellular level, the 2 primary functions of healthy cells, which are uptake of nutrients and elimination or dealing with toxicity, free radicals and oxidative stress, at the cellular level diminish. And this is all proven. Jim can talk about the ranges of what a healthy cell is versus in terms of the actual voltage that can be measured. But the key point here is that we can spend a lot of time and a lot of money on the nutritional side and supplements, and that's important. We are surrounded by toxins in our environment. Some we can see, some we can't. We ingest them. We think we're eating good things. We're eating vegetables, and they're actually not good for us because of the way that they're grown or created. And at the same time, we all know exercise is good intuitively, and so keeping movement and all of that. But rarely do people think about the energetic component. And without energy, we're nothing. And so what we found is that if you can just and Jim will talk about the benefits of this. I'll mention the 4 types of energy, and then maybe Jim can do a little bit deeper dive on explaining what they are. And then we can talk about some ways that you can revitalize yourself just through getting access to these energies and why they're so important. And I think it'll all make sense. The first type of energy, and a lot of people are familiar with this, especially if you're in the biohacking arena, is PEMF, or pulse electromagnetic fields. The Earth's pulse, the Schumann resonance. Look at a NASA study that validates that they actually put frequency generators in spacesuits to prevent astronauts from getting ill when they get into orbit. There's a lot of science and a lot of clinical studies behind the benefits of PEMF, but that's one of the 4 energies. The second is light, or photobiomodulation. not sunlight, cosmic light, and the effect that that has on our cells and our health. And again, lots of studies and validation. The third are frequencies and harmonics. Now, for some of your audience that may have been looking in kind of the legacy technologies that have been around for 100+ years, they may have run across a guy named Royal Rife. And Rife was a scientist that discovered that he could use frequencies to affect the human cells. In fact, he could and proved that he could cure cancer back in the early 1930s by doing a test that was monitored by the AMA using essentially what was called as a Rife machine that was basically killing cancer cells with and the tests prove the results were outstanding, but he was much like Tesla persecuted because of whatever. I'm not going to get into the conspiracy stuff, but frequencies and harmonics are everything. And if you listen to Tesla, which kind of ties behind the fourth kind of energy, which is high voltage, Tesla's mission was to provide energy wirelessly, free energy to the world. It didn't stop with just energy so we can power our devices. It's energy so we can power ourselves. And what's fascinating is that a lot of people have an actual fear of energy. I mean, you think about voltage. You don't want to live next to a power line, and Jim will explain why that's so different than the high voltage that we're describing here. But voltage is extremely high voltage is extremely healthy used correctly. So those are the four types of energy. And Jim, maybe if you wouldn't mind going through each and maybe the mechanisms of action for each so you can understand exactly how these energies do affect us.
Sure. Well, I like to go back to, let's look at nature. So most people don't realize that there are 100 lightning strikes on the planet every single second. Each one's generating hundreds of thousands of harmonics. They're really vital for our lives. We also have that light component, not so much that sunlight, but there's that blue light component that's really that necessary part that we actually evolved in over millions of years. As well as as we mentioned earlier, the PEMF from the Earth itself. So these energies we actually evolved in, and they're very vital for our life. And they're not just we like to have it, but it's a must-have. And as I've evolved in the technology, I was trying to understand, how do these work on a cellular level? So when you look on the, for instance, the voltage, voltage is a very important part on a cellular level for uptake of nutrients and detoxifying, specifically that resting membrane potential. So the resting membrane potential, when it's at an adequate voltage, which is between minus 50 millivolts up to minus 90 millivolts, there's enough of an electric charge that triggers the specific ion channels. It could be the sodium potassium pump or the ATP, it could be the uptake of hormones, it could be the uptake of proteins, nutrients, as well as that detoxification effect. So in healthy cellular function, these positive negative charges create this stress across the cell membrane to create these various ion channels. Also has an effect on the neurons and how the neurons are firing. It has an effect on how the brain works. I mean, there's so many different aspects of that voltage that actually triggers these healthy cellular functions. And as that resting membrane potential drops, its ability to trigger these healthy cellular functions are diminished. So that's why these electric fields have an impact on cellular function, is because it's been proven you can take an external electric field to increase that charge potential across the cell membrane to get it within that adequate voltage to trigger these healthy cellular functions. Also being around the Earth, or these PEMF devices, we're also producing a magnetic field. So magnetic fields work a little differently than the electric field. So when you see an electric field, you have the positive and negative charges that trigger creates the stress across the cell membrane and triggers these healthy cellular functions. magnetic fields work a little differently, but they sort of create the same effect. So a magnetic field, when you have a magnetic field, it doesn't stress the cell membrane like an insulator or dielectric, but what it does is affects those positive, negative charges moving around in our body. So we have these positive, negative charges moving all around within our body. And as they're moving around in the presence of a magnetic field, it picks up an electric charge, much like a generator does when you have a winding moving through a magnetic field. It picks up that electric charge to, again, increase that charge potential to, again, trigger these healthy cellular functions. So these ideas of using electric and magnetic fields have been proven with many studies that it has a direct effect on these uptake of nutrients and detoxification. We also mentioned something about the radio frequencies and harmonics. So as I mentioned with lightning, each lightning strike is generating hundreds of thousands of harmonics that span that entire electromagnetic spectrum. And specifically how those interact is through magnetic resonance. So if you've ever used MRI, it's based off of the principle of magnetic resonant imaging or magnetic resonance. So every cell, every molecule absorbs and emits a specific radio frequency specific to each cell. And as you generate a specific radio station, you can begin to transmit energy between it and actually resonate it, much like two tuning forks of the same pitch. So in physics class or music class, if you ever had two tuning forks of the same pitch, if you strike one through sympathetic vibration, the other one will start to vibrate. Similarly with the radio, what is actually happening with the radios when you set the car radio station at say 540 megahertz, you're literally vibrating the antenna at 540 megahertz, and you have a radio receiver that's tuned to that vibration. It actually picks up that signal. Now, if I change that radio signal, even if I'm close by that radio station, I can't pick up that signal. Yet if I have another radio station miles away that's tuned to that, now I can pick that one up. So your cells are sort of like these one-band radio receivers or tuning forks that are tuned to a specific frequency that they absorb and emit. And when you generate that particular frequency, you can transfer energy into it. So when we're out in nature, these lightning strikes, every second there are 100 of them, they're literally generating hundreds of thousands that span that entire spectrum. So there's what they call the magnetic resonance spectrum. And physics, they've been outlining this for many, many years. It goes from low kilohertz up to about 20 gigahertz. And then from 20 gigahertz and beyond is what they call the molecular band. So all molecules vibrate within that 20 gigahertz up through infrared, far infrared, near infrared, up to visible light. And that's part of the reason why you see these infrared and far infrared, near infrared devices that are out there that are working, is because they're literally resonating on a molecular level. Thirdly, we have this light part of it, so you have this light component. So on an atomic level, all atoms are vibrating spectrums of light that are unique to each specific element. So if you've ever watched forensic files and they're trying to identify a compound, what they'll do is they'll use a gas spectrometer and they'll look at the different wavelengths that are produced, and they can identify, okay, here's the different elements that make up that compound, and they can actually identify it through that light component. So when we go outside, we're exposed to those electric fields through the lightning discharge. We're exposed to the magnetic field of the earth. We're exposed to that light component, not so much just the sunlight. Sunlight, we get the infrared, far infrared, near infrared, but there's also that visible light component, that's specifically that blue in the sky. So, one of the most common questions children ask their parents is, what causes that blue in the sky? Some say maybe the reflection of the water because the earth is mostly water, but it's actually all these elements or gases that are getting excited to fluorescent from the magnetic fields emitting from the sun that emits thousands of different wavelengths in that infrared, far infrared, near infrared, visible light spectrum. So, when we're out in nature, we're exposed to all this natural energy. We evolved in this sea of energy. And it's been proven, as we've studied cosmic rays. So not only here on Earth, we're having these up to 8 million lightning strikes a day, but every other planet's doing the same thing. So anything that has an atmosphere, it's generating these atmospheric discharge are generating frequencies and harmonics. The sun, what we call solar flares, solar storms, are nothing but atmospheric discharges that contribute to what we call cosmic rays. And, over time, we've been monitoring cosmic rays. So cosmic rays actually vary up and down all the time. We're not just getting a constant flux of cosmic rays, but it's varying just because of the nature of how the orchestra of the universe and all the planets that are moving around, and we're getting closer and further away of larger stars, larger systems that are producing more or less energy. We're seeing fluctuations of this energy. And as you monitor it over time, we have definitely periods of higher energy and lower energy sources. And when we have the higher energy sources through cosmic rays, we see better crops, we see less deaths, we see less stillborn, better wineries. So the sea of energy that we're evolved in is a very important part, but there is that varying part that goes along with it. So the idea of being outside in nature is a vital part of it, but in our modern lifestyle, we can't be around that. So there's technologies that are out there that incorporate these types of energies to help provide that natural energy.
Wow.
Told you he was the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah. That's for sure. So,
Yeah.
so let me see if I can translate this in a form that most people will appreciate more than a metaphor. And it's simply this. I mean, when you think of a house, right? And let's say it's a house in the middle of the desert, and you got all your rooms, you got all your stuff in there and everything else. And the temperatures outside are at least 100, and inside it's certainly down to say 70. And so how does that actually happen? Well, you're inputting energy to make sure that there's a divide between the outside of the cell, in this case, and the inside of the cell. And so what's important is for the average person, and also conventional medicine has really focused on addressing illnesses with a targeted approach with, say, for example, drugs, right? But the problem with that is it's not addressing the entire energy system within that house, within that cell. And so again, how does energy actually happen? Well, energy never dissipates. Energy is energy. It just gets transformed in one form or another. And that's exactly what happens in the cell. The cell needs to create energy. And so part of how we get that energy is through the energy that surrounds us. And so with all the different types of energies, and even the energies that we haven't been able to even identify, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of them out there. And only recently we've discovered radio waves. I mean, before that, we didn't understand what that was. We didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were, and that pulse emission from the Earth's surface, how that affects us all the time. And so we have to now address our health optimization by incorporating energy into that equation. And it's something that's going to have a larger impact on ourselves than just, for example, taking a drug. And let's take, for example, something that happens a lot. That's inflammation. We now understand that most, clinical conditions are the result of inflammation. Now, part of that, as Jim so eloquently shared with us earlier on, the main purpose of the cell, besides surviving, by the way, the main purpose of the cell is to incorporate nutrients from the outside of the cell and remove the toxic products and get it outside of the cell. What does the cell need? It needs energy for all of that to happen. Now, when there's a lack of energy, and Jim again said, there's a voltage difference of about 40, so minus 50 to minus 90. And when the cell is below that, that means it doesn't have enough ability to make sure that cell works, properly, and then it's going to begin to be dysfunctional, and so that then leads to inflammation. So how do we optimize that? Well, of course, if there's a lack of nutrients, of course, then obviously by having better nutrition in there would help. But what's more instantaneous is introducing energies around the body right away. And let's just go back millions of years and just, again, putting in context, because, energy is so ethereal. It's so intangible for most people to appreciate, but appreciate this, and if you want to believe what Darwin said in survival of the fittest, it's actually survival of what's most flexible. And what happens is that with all these energies, all these triggers and all these challenges that, all species have been exposed to, those that have been able to adapt to them in the best possible way are the ones that are going to continue that species. And let's take one example. Now I'm going to get a little granular here, because I want to seem as smart as Jim, of course, but let's get a little granular here, is that the energy center of a cell is called a mitochondria. And most people are now beginning to understand what that is. That actually we used to be a bacterium. That used to be a bacterium that somehow was incorporated in the human cell as a symbiotic relationship. And so what does that mean? It means that our human cells adapted and then depended on those changes that they were exposed to. So said simply, we are very dependent on all those energies. And when we don't have access to that, then that becomes a problem. And I'll give one different example. And that is this, is that since the 1950s, and I'd love to hear your guys' standpoint on this as well, but since the 1950s, the rubber sole was invented. And as a result, we've seen a massive acceleration or increase in all sorts of medical conditions. And so it's more of an association. I don't know if it's a cause and effect specifically, but it's an interesting association. What does that mean? Is that we are now less connected with the earth. We are less able to absorb, all these electrons that we need, for different reasons. And so, yeah, I mean, this is what's happening. We are now more disconnected from these energies. And let's face it, think of a time that you've gone outside, into the country, not just for a couple of hours, but maybe for a couple of days or a week, and how much better you actually feel. Just again, as Jim alluded to, when you get exposed to these energies, it makes a huge difference. And later on, I'll share one little story about a girl that developed serious panic and anxiety disorders, and the solution was actually get some sunlight. So where do you guys want to go with this right now? I mean, what do you want the listener to know about what they can do and anything else?
Sure. A couple things that you triggered. That was great. I love the analogy of the house in the desert too. And one of the things that I like about this, and there's a lot in the quantum world that clearly is affecting us. And it's not that I don't believe in quantum; it's hard to understand, and in most cases, very difficult to be measured by means that we know about, at least today. But each of these four energies can be measured, and I'll go back to the comment earlier on, chronic disease and the rapid increase of it, is that led by Dr. Jerry Tennant, who I'm sure you're familiar with, and wrote a book, Healing is Voltage. It's just, he basically outlines why the body should be looked at more like an electrical system than a biochemical system when it comes to voltage. He studied 80 chronic diseases and found the one common characteristic across all were inadequate cellular voltage. And then to your point on the measurements, the cell health can be measured and the voltage in the cell can be measured. And to your point, I think 60 to 90 is ideal. You get below 60 and you have unhealthy cells, and you get into and Jim, you might be able to clear this one. I think it's in the 2025 minus 20-25 millivolts. Now you're talking about a pathogen or cancer cell. So just keeping in mind that it's real. The lack of energy is really affecting our health, and until we find a way to restore that, things aren't going to get better. So there are different ways that we could, if you are looking at this via video, you see I'm sitting outside right now. I love to be outside as much as I can, and I've consciously gotten with my shoes off. Yes, I'm on a deck, but when I walk around in the yard, I've got my shoes up. I'm just a little more conscientious about that, and just like anything else, in our lifestyle, we have to be willing to try different things and make changes. But, people, a lot of your listeners exercise. All right. Well, why not make sure that you exercise? It's Tony Robbins. I think you and I met at a Tony Robbins event originally. And Tony's the ultimate example of ultimate energy, right? By the way, he loves, he's got a device I'll tell you about a little later that you might have heard of. But at the end of the day, for us to be able to have the level of energy to do the things that we want, we've got to find something different. We've got to find something to offset what modern life has done to us so far. We're not good. Stable is not good enough. Gravity will get us there. So just finding ways, looking at a lot of the biohacking technologies and doing research around, photobiomodulation and what are the best devices for that. Or not everyone can afford this in their home, but now there's a lot of different, call them health and wellness spas, recovery spas, biohacking centers. And it's interesting that we've been doing a lot of studying around the wellness industry because not everyone can afford to have all this expensive technology in their homes, but they can all easily, just like a gym membership, go and have access to it if it was made available. So we're trying to see what are the barriers for people to, improve their wellness. And it's really interesting. It boils down to three things. That they need to see a tangible result, and they want to see it right away. We have no patience. The second thing is that they don't want to have to change their habits. It's very hard to take those deep-seated habits and make an overnight change. So as little of that as possible. And the third is that they set too high an expectations, or more importantly, the wellness businesses are setting too high an expectation for that client so that they're disappointed. A lot of times the clients or members will have a realistic expectation, but the sales guy at the biohacking center wants to sign you up today. And so he's going to make you promises that, quite frankly, no one could make and be sure, because we're all very different. So with that said, do your, this is a form of education, and Bart, you've done a great job in service of helping so many people learn more, especially people that are serving others as well. I will mention that aside from some great devices that are out there that can do each of these individual, provide each of these energies as we talked about, and again, it all can be measured. So my recommendation is if you're looking, if you're looking at PEMF, for example, and you look up what all the benefits are, and those are in alignment with what you want, then do the research on what's the best PEMF device out there, so that you can make sure that whether you're buying it or you're going to use it somewhere, that you're getting the best, because like anything else, there's a wide array of things out there to choose from. To my knowledge, there's only one system that provides all four energies simultaneously, and it happens to be the BioCharger.
Right.
And Jim, who literally has spent over 30 years of his life dedicated to finding how to help people get better and improve their health and wellness. It's not a medical device. In fact, you don't even have to touch it. You get to sit next to it for 12 to 15 minutes, and you can do that with 3 or 4 or 5 people simultaneously. And what it's doing is replicating and amplifying and creating a sphere of these four energies that are bathing your body in a biocompatible way, so that you can now at the cellular level literally boost that cellular voltage, so that those 3 to 4 million new cells per second, they're friggin' perfect. They're healthy. And there is nothing, there's a saying that I love, and it's the power that creates the body is the power that heals the body. And if you can provide the energy so that we can let our bodies heal themselves, we're so much better off than trying drugs or unsustainable. And by the way, this is sustainable. These are sustainable processes that are, don't have to necessarily be done daily, but on a regular basis are going to get you amazing results. we all want to live longer, but do we really want to live longer? Or do we want to live healthy where we can be active and do the things we want to do and then die the day after we can't? Because the only one I know that wants to live is 100 is a guy that's 99. But, you know, and one last stat, and it's that in the US today, the average retirement age is 62 years old. The average health span is 64 years old. That means the period of your life that you can do whatever you want to do without being constrained by chronic disease or illness or, you know, oh, there's my granddog. So if you can hear that in the background, must be a visitor. But, and by the way, they love the BioCharger in nature too. But you can make a huge difference on your health by introducing energy as part of your lifestyle and regimen.
Yeah, I love it. I'm gonna let Jim answer. I know you get to share, and then I got a lot to share as well in response to all that. And a real cool image came up. But Jim, please share with us your genius as well.
Yeah. So one thing I really liked is when you were talking about going barefoot outside, or the whole idea of having that rubber sole. So, you know, the idea we have these lightning strikes that are happening on the planet every single second seems so distant, because how often do you really see a lightning strike around you? But when you think about it, when Ben Franklin flew his kite up into the air, he not only during the lightning storm generate that lightning spark, but they determined that even in a clear day, when you have that kite up in the air, there's a difference of voltage of potential between the Earth and the atmosphere. And the further away you get up in the, away from the Earth, there's a higher difference of voltage potential that surrounds the whole Earth. It's called the, part of that Schumann resonance. And when we're barefoot on the ground in nature, we begin to be like little antennas that actually pick up that energy. And one of the things that have happened with the rubber shoes, now we've separated that grounding from that to allow us to actually pick up that energy. So it isn't just this mythical idea that there's this, unseen energy that's around us, but it's happening, miles and miles away from us, but it's actually part of that atmosphere that surrounds us all. So when we're outside in nature, for those people that are looking for ways to actually have benefits, that's one of the best ways to do it, is just to be outside in nature. And it isn't just, a hippie idea that says it makes me feel good, but there's plenty of evidence that actually supports why it's important. And we evolved in that sea of energies. So if you can replicate it with these other devices, then, you have that benefit of, because I have to spend so much time indoors because of my modern lifestyle, there are ways we actually get that energy without having to go outside.
Yeah, so thank you for that share. And to be even more granular, I guess there's anywhere between 2 and 8 million lightning strikes all over the world. And each lightning, I mean, I think we can all agree there's a lot of energy in that. Well, that energy actually circulates the world in about 8.1 seconds. And so wherever there's a lightning strike, it's actually affecting you. And so, and when it comes to the barefoot, I mean, I'll give you some context to people. Everybody understands what oxygen-free radicals are. I mean, that's the buzzword these days. Well, part of the problem with the oxygen-free radicals is that they steal electrons from proteins and the DNA, and as a result can cause, DNA mutations, which then lead to cancer, stuff like that. And so there's a structure within the tissue matrix, and it's called the matrazome. And the matrazome is a structure that it's an undefined structure, but it's more of an energetic structure that holds a lot of electrons. And those get depleted throughout the day because it's, just neutralizing the free radicals. But if we don't replace them, then it becomes a problem. And so actually the studies are showing, and I don't know how accurate they are, but studies are showing that if you do at least 30 minutes of barefoot walking on natural ground, so it can't be regular floors, it can't be, roads and that kind of stuff, or pavement, it has to be on natural ground, so that you can replenish it. And they also have devices that definitely, these electromagnetic or electric mats that will help restore that. But shifting a little bit, as you're talking about the BioCharger, which is a phenomenal device, by the way, and I'll expand a little bit on that. But I was thinking hookah bars or bio bars. I think at one day maybe we'll have all these bio bars that people can go to, sit around, have a drink, maybe, around these devices. And why is it really important? Well, I think there's going to be a shift, and I actually have a solve for one of the challenges that you brought up there, Jim, as far as how do people get access to that. And this is a mission I've been on for the last 20 years, is to help people get an easy access to all the available technologies and afford them as well. And so I'm not ready to share exactly how I'm going to do that, but that's going to come out next year, and it's going to be it'll be a paradigm shift in how we get access to health optimization. And it's really important because people need to know what's available. And part of my job as the doctor's guide is also to curate and educate. And so, when you go to these large events like Tony Robbins and you see this device there, you see a bunch of people there, you mentioned that people want something tangible. They want to feel an immediate result. But think of it this way, right? I mean, if you don't consistently drink enough water, then we all understand that that's detrimental to our body, but you don't necessarily immediately notice the benefits of drinking enough water. It's the same thing with energy, right? Your body needs energy. And unless you give, and all the different types of energy is the one that you mentioned, and unless the body consistently gets them, it's going to deteriorate. And it's going to take 10 years or 20 years or maybe 30 years for all of that to manifest. But why would you even do that, right? Are you going to deprive yourself from water on a daily basis? Are you going to deprive yourself from necessary proteins that you need? I mean, those are so obvious. And you're right. People don't quite understand the value of energy because you can't touch it. You can't really see it. So, except for your device, it's pretty visible and visual. And so I like that. And the other problem that I see, and this is a conversation that I'm having with my colleagues, and I actually have a masterclass to address this as well, is that part of the problem that we have today is the singular approach. People are just looking at one solution as if it's going to take care of everything. And we also see that in the biohacking world and also the bioenergy world, and they just give one type of energy and that's about it. Well, you have to have an aggregate of different types of approaches. And that's what's nice about the BioCharger system. And that is to have access to all these different, if you want to be efficient, right? Get them all at the same time and recognize the listener needs to recognize that they're not necessarily going to feel anything, but your body is certainly going to be a lot happier.
And to your point with the having that, there isn't just one answer to everything. It's important to understand that even though we are triggering these cellular functions to help you uptake those nutrients, without delivering any value in nutrients, you're just, really not accomplishing anything. So it's important to also have that nutrition that goes along with this that really helps to complement all that. So, without getting it into intercellular, you're just, peeing your nutrients away. So you have to have the energy to actually get it into the nucleus of the cell, but you have to also have to deliver it at the same time. So it's really a multifaceted effect. And that's what we're really seeing more and more, especially in the biohacking community, where they're doing these different nutritional things that help to deliver the value of nutrition to it, but also adding the energy component to really, help it to do its work. I sort of look at it as like an engine. A car engine, you need three things. You need oxygen, you need fuel, and you need a spark. Without all three, you're not going to have a healthy running engine. And our bodies are the same way. So you have to have nutrition, you have to have good oxygen flow, and you also have to have that energy within the cell to actually pull it all together and make it all useful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I mean, let's face it, people spend hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars every month on supplements. Well, if you're not effectively absorbing them, and again, there's other reasons why we may not be able to absorb them, but that's a different conversation. But certainly energetically, if your cells are not optimized, yeah, you're spending a lot of money for nothing. And then you're wondering, well, why am I not getting better? Why am I not getting the results? And, when we do these different tests, for example, and this is just an eye opener for me just right now, is that, I do extensive lab testing of micronutrients as an example. And then you see that the serum levels of a certain vitamin are really high, but intracellular, they're not. And so obviously, I mean, one reason could be maybe it's being overused, right? But the other is they're just not being absorbed. And that could definitely be an energetic failure of the cell. that it's incapable of absorbing those nutrients.
Absolutely.
And you know what's interesting too is we think about energy and uplift and uptake of nutrients, but one of the things the body does when it gets energy, the first thing it wants to do is clean house. And so having the right cellular energy allows your body to detoxify in ways that you may not have experienced in a long time. So equally as important as getting that uptake of nutrients is elimination of the oxidative stress and free radicals and all of the bad stuff and parasites that are in our system. And if you eat sushi, you have parasites. And one of the nice things about the BioCharger is that going back to the earlier mention of Royal Rife, and part of our intellectual property is the way that we, through software, can control not only the 4 types of energies, but very specific frequencies and frequency sets in such a way that we can target supporting recovery from very specific conditions. So again, it's not a medical device. We aren't medical experts. We don't cure anything. But the BioCharger does target and can provide energy where it's needed most by the use of specific frequencies that, Jim can tell you the calculations of how you can take any cell size and what frequencies associated with it. That's way over my head and probably most of your audiences, but it's true.
Well, the whole principle of the MRI is based off that absorption and emission of the signal. So, we recognize that from a diagnostic point of view that, cells have a specific absorption and emission frequency. And that's all been, evolving over the years through the advancements of MRIs. So as we look through the advancements of MRIs, they started to look at different frequency ranges to see how they absorb and emit different signals. And, the clarity of the images are really based off of the frequency ranges that they're looking at. And by applying those ideas to target for a particular outcome, so if you know how things are vibrating, if you look at many different ways you can look at the cell resonance, whether it's the diameter of the cell corresponds to a wavelength, or the length of it corresponds to a wavelength or absorption frequency, or the magnetic resonance. There are different ways you can target it. Now, granted, we're not generating enough energy to, rip those bonds apart, which is, requires a lot of energy, but we're simply just adding a little energy to resonate on a cellular level to actually add energy into it. So, some people think that, you need a lot of energy, with MRIs, you have these really strong magnetic fields to create the effect that what you're looking at, to rip the bonds. We're not trying to do anything like that. We're just simply just trying to resonate on a cellular level.
And thank you for that. And let me give the listener a little bit of context as well. And so we have 10,000 name parts in our body, including molecules and proteins and everything else, and so cellular structures. And all of them have what's called an energy or unique energy signature. So what does that mean? Basically, as Jim was saying, they emit a certain energy frequency wave, whatever it is, it's that energy, which a different word that I like to use, it's information. So it's just like if I were the antenna, my mouth is as emitting information and my ears is receiving that information. And so every molecule protein does that. They have the ability to receive and also emit energy. And when 2 molecules come close together, the configuration of the structural configuration of the molecule changes based on the fact that they're emitting or transmitting or receiving energy. So what does that mean, for us in that context is that, all this energy that's actually coming in is affecting everything else. And what's a classic example of this? I mean, when you're around certain people, you get to feel a certain way. And how does that actually happen is that the heart itself, when electricity goes through a wire, it creates an electromagnetic field around it. And so just think of the heart pulsating, 60 times a minute. Every time a heart pulses, that's the electricity going through the entire heart. It creates an electromagnetic field. And that's information that information then extends and radiates throughout the entire body. So your 70 trillion cells are being affected by that. And guess what? That electromagnetic field, and this is all scientifically proven, that electromagnetic field then radiates at least 12 to 15 feet from you. So that's information that you're conveying to other people. This is real, folks. This is actually scientifically proven. So what does that mean for us, right? Having all these different frequencies, emitted in a very disciplined way, in a very targeted way, can be very beneficial. We now know that the bacterium that causes Lyme's disease emanates and receives specific energy frequencies. You can knock off that bacterium with a very specific frequency. And I think it may have been Rife that actually did it with a radio frequency, and I think it's 683 hertz or it's 863 hertz or something like that, or megahertz. I'm not exactly sure, but it's proven. And so the beauty about but the problem with just hitting a bacterium in this particular case with just one frequency, it's not enough. With your device, the BioCharger, I'm assuming that with all the different types of frequencies, the effect is going to be a lot more effective. And so I don't know exactly what you guys do, but certainly, that's the future. The wellness revolution started in the 80s. Then we started with the regenerative medicine, revolution started in this new millennium. And the next one that's really getting full force is the bioenergy technologies. And that's going to be the paradigm shift, or one of the paradigm shifts that is happening today. And you guys are one of those that are leading the charge.
Yeah. Well, and actually, I'd like to correct a little bit. That really, the revolution started at the turn of last century, the 1900s. So as I started digging into this, there wasn't just Royal Rife and Lahosky and all these other guys. I mean, there was so many researchers. And as I started to go down that rabbit hole, I found that there were 25,000 practitioners in the United States alone that was using some form of energy at the turn of last century.
Yep.
That was back in the day of, I looked at it, it was really the glory day of possibilities. Nowadays we think that nothing's possible, everything's been done. But back then, everything was possible and nothing was, done. So there was that big renaissance when it came to this type of technology. And I think that what happened in the 30s and 40s, and rightfully so, that science came to believe that it was chemistry that drove this magical electricity, this electrochemistry in our bodies. But it was really different than this, what we perceive to be as electric fields and magnetic fields from an engineering perspective. But in reality, as we came back to it, we're realizing that they're really one and the same. There really is no difference. There's really no difference between what we see in the atmosphere, what we see in our bodies. I loved your analogy with the heart. Not only is the heart radiating out, but that charge from the heart goes to the brain. That electricity goes to the brain, and that's what triggers all those neurons and stuff like that in our brains. So really that information, that charge goes to the brain, and that brain creates that information that now transmits through the body that triggers these functions that we need. And it's really no different than how electrical circuits work. So we really are nothing more than electric beings driven by this electric universe that has a direct influence on us.
Yeah, very well said. And you are absolutely right. And many of those devices, by the way, before the turn of the last century, were actually sold by Sears Roebuck. And then,
wow,
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
And but by the stroke of a pen back in 1906, because of the Flexner report, that was all wiped out, which is unfortunate. But fortunately, a lot of people continued doing a lot of the research and everything else. But I want to thank you both for today, because this has been so insightful and informative for all the listeners to understand and appreciate the fact that, yes, there is a pathway to optimizing health. Doesn't require, all these drugs and surgeries as a last resort to treat a disease that is absolutely preventable by doing all the right things and energetically getting access to that. And so I'd like to give each of you both 1 minute for any last comments, and then we will sign off.
Sure. I would just say we really appreciate having this conversation around the education, around the impact of energy and how it can affect our health and wellness. And you got me really curious about what you're working up that you're going to release next year. But in the meantime, Bart, if any of your listeners would like to experience a BioCharger experience anywhere in the world, please have them go to biocharger.com, look up our locator, BioCharger locator, and we will provide a complimentary BioCharger session at a client near them. So feel free to reach out to us. We'll make the arrangements. But just want to extend that offer to your audience so that they can go and experience it for themselves. And I can pretty much say they won't feel nothing. We have people that say, because everyone's different. Wow, I feel this energy, or I can feel vibration, or they notice that they slept better, or their headache's gone, or their aches and pains and things like that. But trying is believing. And so you may not be able to see it, but you'll know the impact of it. But thanks very much. And we hope that in some way we've helped educate some of your listeners to motivate them to get more energy in their lives, natural energy.
And spot on with the fact that it's going to affect you. But I will also admit that not everyone will feel something. But that's the purpose of this, is to educate people, to have them recognize that you don't have to feel something to know that it's actually benefiting you in the moment. Jim.
Yeah, I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you about the subject. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about it. And it's nice to be able to share with people that they're more scientifically minded. Usually my conversations tend to go over most people's heads, but in the scientific community, they can resonate with some of these ideas. And it isn't just this, hippy dippy new age idea of, vibrations and vibes and all that stuff, but there's plenty of scientific evidence that supports these contentions that we're talking about today. And, go look for yourselves and, find out, what's out there, and you'll seek it out. And as Jim said, any opportunity to go try a BioCharger, and see what it is for yourself. I think that they will all be pleasantly surprised.
I love it. Well, Jim and Jim, thank you so much. Really appreciate, giving a lot of content and context for an opportunity and a pathway for people to optimize their health, because that's really where it's at. And I think, so there's a comment that says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I would say, a pound of wellness is worth a ton of prevention. And so thinking of it that way, this is absolutely something that ultimately needs to be everywhere, because it's a game changer. And it's just like, working out on a regular basis. It's like eating the right kinds of food. It's avoiding all the different types of toxins, and it's obtaining all the right energies. And that's also now available. Jim and Jim, thank you so much. And I am Dr. Bart Rademaker. This is Prescription for Your Transformation. Real people, real conversations, and real success. Tapping into the body and the brain and the energy intelligence within us. And this is also part of the Doctor's Guide. Thank you so much, and we will be back.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Dr. Rademaker's Prescription for Your Transformation. Continue the path towards discovering your own authentic genius by tuning in next time for more real conversations with real people.
well, I was almost going to say a joke. They say that about porn. It's hard to describe it. You know it when you see it. Anyway, you can edit that out. But